Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Today we're going to try to do one that's relatively short. I just want to kind of focus on some of the material that you're going to need to be able to do the labs. So we're just going to look at essentially accessing material that is in a dictionary data structure. So that we can just get at things and use them, right? Like that's the big goal of this module and the things that you're doing with a dictionary, right? Because like a dictionary in other programming languages, we might call it like, say, a hash map or an associative array. Like there are many different names for what Python calls a dictionary, and there are a lot of different purposes for why we would use it. And primarily, you know, one of the things that we could do with it is something called memoization or memoization. In memoization, I can basically keep track of things that are present by creating a hash for that or a key for that and then storing the value associated with that. So it can help me to increase the efficiency of a program, right? But at this level, we're not going to worry about that. That's just one of the things that we could do with something like this. So what I want to do is I want to just be able to kind of go through some stuff here and just talk to you all about how we would basically access something and change it. Right? So essentially what I want to do here is I am going to do something that you could adapt to what you're doing um, in your labs, right? I want to be able to have a dictionary that I can access, that I can put some information into, and then recall some of that information and maybe do something with it. All right, so what I might want to do is, so first of all, let's go ahead and put in all of our required materials here. So I'm going to put in my shebang statement, hashbang /usr/bin/env python 3. And we'll go ahead and add our main gate if name is main. And normally here I would put a pass statement here until we came back to this, right? Just so I could get Python to quit yelling at me with an error there. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a dictionary here. And since I'm not using the dictionary directly in a function, I'm going to put it behind the main gate. Right? Remember that basically the only thing that we put outside of our main gate would be functions. Right? So I can create a dictionary. Let's call this students. Right? So I'm going to have a dictionary. I'm going to call it students, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty set of curly braces. And this is basically just going to be, like, I can create a student ID here, right? So maybe 00001 and give that to, say, a student name. Let's say this is Billy Johnson. All right, I could create another student ID as a key here, 00002. And that is, say, Amanda, I don't know, Jones. Right, and let's do one more so we could have a little bit more of a full dictionary here. Let's say something like, so we can have student 00003, and we could have them named, let's try Thomas Smith. Right, just some real generic names. Right, so some things to point out here, right? You see that we have a colon separating our key and our value, and then between different values or different pairs, we have the comma separating the lines. Remember that I don't put a comma after the last line. So what I think I want to be able to do here is I want to be able to enter a student ID number. I want to be able to take and put it into a function. And then I want to be able to return the name of that student, right, in the event that they put a number in there. But I may want the number to be not exact. Right? Because I might not put the leading zeros here. I might want to just be able to put 1, 2, 3, whatever, instead of having to put, the entire leading zero thing. That's going to lead to fewer errors on the part of the user. So in order to do this, we would want to do a little bit of text manipulation, right? Which is something that we've done in a previous module. So doing some text manipulation is going to help us out here. It's also something that we would want to do in relation to, say, the date picker. The date picker lab, right? Like if you look at the date picker lab, we see that we have different parts of a singular string. different parts of a singular string that we're going to want to kind of break apart and use separately. So we'd want to use some things that we learned in the last module in terms of how we would, like, say, split text in order to do that. So we could split it into a list and then use that list to do different things. Right, really, or whatever, kind of whatever we wanted to do. So something that I would want to do here, for example, would be maybe I would use an input. Let's say I made a variable called, say, student ID and set it equal to an input of enter student ID. Or enter student ID number to make it more clear. Right, so now I have two values here that I would essentially want to be able to pass to a function. Right, my student ID number and my student's dictionary. So if I wanted to create a function here, I could define a function called, say, student lookup. And here I would want two parameters. I would want an ID and, let's say, student underscore dictionary. So when we call this function, we can include these two parameters. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to assume, or actually we don't really need to assume, right? We can do some calculations to where we can use the pattern that we have defined for our student ID number in our dictionary to take advantage of that. So what I might want to do here is I might want to have another function, right? And we'd call it like def normalized underscore ID. And we'd bring in some ID value here. And I'm accidentally writing Java here instead of Python. Sorry, I'm also teaching the Java class. Some of you probably caught that. So let's put a pass statement under here until we're ready to come back to that. Then we'll delete the pass statement. So I'm taking in the ID value, and I can write a conditional here that basically says, if ID.length is less than 5, then we would want to return. We'd want to get the value, right? So we'd say y equals 5 minus ID.length. And then we could return 0 times y concatenated with ID. Right, so that way I would take and I would add as many leading zeros as I would need to add to be able to turn this into a 5-digit ID. Right, so if we wanted to test this at this point, right, we could just simply in our student lookup function here, we could print normalize ID with the parameter of the ID parameter. So now if we were to call this, right, we would want to call this and call our student lookup function student lookup with the ID being student ID, the input that we've taken here, and the other parameter being the student dictionary. All right, and so this is just allowing us to do a little bit of incremental testing so that if I were to run this, it's going to ask me to enter a student ID number. I could enter 1 and whoops, I'm doing Python again here. Or I have to remember that I'm doing Python again. len ID len ID doing Java. Accidentally typing Java, accidentally programming in Java instead of Python. That's what happens when you are doing multiple classes in something at once. So there we go. All right, once we program in the right language, we get the right response. So it takes that number 1 value and it turns it into 00001. And we're returning that back. And so in this case, we could take the value n and set it to the normalized ID. Now, if we wanted to make this a better program, right, what I would want to do here is I would want to return an else as well. And say something like else return ID. Right, that way it's always going to return something. So if it is 5 or more characters long, it's going to just send that into our student lookup function without us having to worry about it. And now really here to do our student lookup from here to actually use the dictionary, it's pretty simple. Right, so in this case, we're just going to print the value of our parameter of student dictionary. So in this case, it would be student dictionary. And then in square brackets, we put our key, which in this case is going to be n, because it's going to be the variable value that we have here. Right, so that will allow us to enter a 1, 2, 3, 4-digit student ID number, and then get the name of that student. Right, so if we had like another one in our dictionary here, and we had like a 00100, and that student's name was like Rachel Thompson or whatever, right? We could run our program. We could say, oh, that's student 100. It's going to add the extra zeros in our normalize ID function. So it would give us 00100, and it would return the right name of the student from our dictionary. Right? The idea here being that we can kind of use our dictionary like a flat file database. Right? So we get that it is Rachel Thompson there in our output. And the same thing would happen if I did, like, say, 2 for Amanda Jones, right? Or whatever. And so this gives us the ability to look through this dictionary, work through this dictionary. And at the end of the day, the big thing that we're doing here is we're just kind of focusing on what's in our dictionary and the lookup values that are in our dictionary. And we did a lot of that, in the pre-recording last week, where we looked at reading from a dictionary, adding to a dictionary. Right, and one of the more tricky things about the date decoder lab is going to be this sort of piece right here, where we're doing the data normalization, right? Like in that lab, it's going to be a completely different style of data normalization than it would be in this lab. But we could still utilize that sort of thing if we wanted to, right? Like, let's say instead of just getting a straight number out of here, we get, we have them enter 2 numbers or 2 values, right? And we have our user enter a student ID number and an initial. So we can say student ID number and last initial. And we can separate it by space. And one of the things that we could do there maybe is that we could check to see if the last initial matches. And so then if it matches, we return the name. Right? Just as a proof of concept. Right? Remember, we're taking big problem, working it down to little problem. And sometimes we work problems just to work problems. Just to see how we would approach a situation. Right? So now if I'm getting a last initial and a first name, if I'm getting them in one input, what I'm doing here is essentially a split. Right? I can split these. The dot split. And split them on the space. So now when I'm entering into student lookup is not a single string. It is a list of strings of a string of a student ID number and a list of a student last initial. Right, so now I can still pass that student ID number into my normalize ID function. I just have to do it a little bit different. Right, because at this point, ID is now an array with an ID number and a last initial. So I would want to look at index location 0 here when I normalize, because that's always going to be the first item in my array. The student ID number is always going to be first. Right, so in this case, if I enter in 0 space or 1, say, space J, right, we're still using that 1 to get the full ID number, and we're getting Billy Johnson. Right, but in addition to that, we're getting this value returned, and this value that's being returned is the student name value. Right, so student dictionary at the N key is the student name. And so if we wanted to check that against the index location of that, right, I could create a variable here called, say, last name, and set it equal to student name dot split, and we split it on at the first, or no, we're going to split it on a space again, and we're going to give it at the first index location. Right, and that's just going to print the last name. So if I printed last name, right, we entered 1 and J again, we would see that we just get the last name here. So now we can do the comparison between this J that's being entered in and this J that's at the first of the last name. Right? Because the ideal thing that we're doing here is we're wanting to check to see if the student ID number and the name of the student, or at least the first initial of the student, match up. First initial of the last name. So in this case, I'd just want to do a comparison, right? And I'd want to do a comparison between ID. So I could say if ID at index location 1 dot upper, and upper is a function, is equal to last name at index location 0, because that's going to be the first letter, then we're going to print the student, the whole student name. Else, we're going to print mismatch, try again, and just stop our program. Or something like, say, mismatch, entry not found. All right. So that way, when I have all the information I need and I enter 1 space J, I get Billy Johnson. But if I entered 1 space R, they don't match, so I get a mismatch, entry not found error here. Right, and so it's this kind of splitting that we discussed in the last module. That's going to be pretty elemental for you to be able to complete your labs. Right, so if you can just kind of take what we've done here, twist it, change it, and apply it to the labs, you can basically do every lab, right? Because we are accessing a dictionary and printing things out of it, and we're also doing some text manipulation to change keys to get to a specific key that can get us a specific output using the split function and different things. Right, and so really that's all that I want to do with you all this afternoon. Right, I said it'd be pretty quick, pretty simple. Right, I just wanted to do a little demonstration that would be able to give you all some more support as you are completing your labs. Labs for this week are due on Thursday. Next week we will not have anything, right? Because next week is spring break, so I'm just giving everybody the week off. You don't have to worry about anything or everything or what have you. Right, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here for today. If you are watching this and you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message and let me know. But that is all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.